Have you ever looked at a train racing past you and thought, yeah, that's pretty big, without realizing you're only seeing the smallest end of an entire world full of steel giants? Because the truth is, most of us ride trains, see trains, or hear about trains, but almost nobody knows what kind of monsters actually exist on the rails. I'm talking about machines so massive that if you stood next to one, you'd look like a toy action figure. Machines so heavy that the ground trembles when they move. Machines so extreme that engineers literally had to reinforce the tracks just to let them operate without destroying everything underneath. And today, you're about to discover them. Now imagine this. You're in the middle of the desert. The heat is so intense it feels like the air itself is melting. And out of nowhere, you hear a deep rumble, like thunder rolling across the sand. A long shadow begins to crawl across the ground. And before you even see the locomotive, you feel the vibration in your chest. This isn't a normal train. This is a colossus, a machine built not just to move freight from point A to point B, but to push the limits of physics, engineering, and even imagination. That's the world we're stepping into. And trust me, the deeper you go, the crazier it gets. Some of these locomotives were built to crush mountains. Some were made to survive deserts. Some were built to shred through snowstorms that look like scenes from another planet. And the one at the end of this journey, well, let's just say it's so old and so massive. Chances are your grandparents weren't even born when it first hit the rails. So buckle up. Because you're about to meet the titans of the steel highway. Let's start with a steam locomotive from South Africa that did something almost no other steam train in history could do: recycle its own steam. Yes, you heard that right. While other steam engines were choking down water every few miles, the South African Railways Class 25 was out here running through scorching deserts like it was nothing. Picture this beast rolling across the Karoo Desert back in the 1950s, a place where temperatures climb so high that even metal feels like it's melting. Water is scarce. Conditions are brutal. Yet this locomotive was expected to haul heavy freight across hundreds of miles without stopping. That was impossible for a normal steam engine. So engineers had to think outside the box. Or in this case, outside the boiler. The secret was its condensing system. Instead of blasting used steam out into the air, it captured it, cooled it, and turned it back into water again. Almost like the train was breathing its own steam back in to survive. This allowed it to run up to 600 miles, yes, 600 miles, without refilling water. For a steam locomotive, that's basically superhuman. Now imagine the size of this thing. Over 110 feet long, nearly 500,000 pounds, and shaped more like a futuristic bullet than a dusty old steam engine. When people saw it for the first time, they couldn't believe a steam locomotive could look that sleek. And when they heard it, the sound was unforgettable. A deep hiss, a powerful chuff, and the soft whoosh of steam being recycled back into the system. It looked and sounded alive. And even after diesel engines took over the world, many Class 25s kept on working well into the 1980s. Some were even converted into simpler, non-condensing versions for areas where water wasn't a problem. Today, a few of these giants still survive in museums, and if you ever hear one fire up, you'll never forget it. But if you think that's impressive, wait until you meet a locomotive that can literally switch personalities mid-journey. Now travel with me to Europe. It's 2020. Trains are getting smarter, cleaner, and more efficient. And Germany reveals a machine that looks like it belongs in a sci-fi movie, the Siemens Vectron Dual Mode XXL. At first glance, it looks like a modern, sharp-edged freight locomotive. But here's the twist. It can run on electricity or diesel, automatically. You don't push a button. You don't stop the train. It detects electrified track overhead and switches its whole power system on the fly. 1 second, it's roaring like a diesel beast. The next, it's whisper quiet and fully electric. The engineer barely notices. The passengers don't notice. Only the ground feels the difference. And this isn't some small hybrid machine. It's 92 feet long and weighs as much as several elephants stacked together. Inside, it carries two entire propulsion systems, a full diesel engine on one side, electric converters and transformers on the other. It's basically two locomotives fused into one body. On diesel mode, the Vectron growls. On electric mode, it glides almost silently, perfect for cities where noise is a big issue. And because it doesn't need to stop to switch engines, cargo companies save massive amounts of time and money. But here's my favorite detail. It became so popular, so fast, that model train hobbyists started recreating it almost instantly. Within its first year, it had already become a star in the miniature world of whole-scale layouts. When a train becomes a toy icon that quickly, you know it's special. Now hold on to your seat, because the next locomotive on this journey doesn't whisper. It doesn't glide. It roars. Travel to the United States in the 1990s, a time when American freight railroads wanted something bigger, tougher, and more powerful than anything they'd ever used before. And General Electric answered with a monster, the GEAC6000CW. This machine was so strong, so raw, so ridiculously powerful, that railroads had to reinforce the tracks just to handle it. It pumped out 6,000 horsepower, making it the most powerful diesel-electric locomotive in the world at the time. When it ran at full throttle, the sound was like a thunderstorm ripping across the plains. You didn't just hear it. You felt it in your bones. 70-5 feet long. Over 40,000 pounds. A V16 diesel engine the size of a small building. This thing was a land battleship. And when it hauled freight, it wasn't pulling a few cars. It could haul over 100 loaded cars at once, sometimes more. But here's what made it truly legendary. Its engine, the 7HDL16, was so new and so powerful that it pushed locomotive engineering into a whole new era. It didn't stay in production long, mostly because of cost and complexity, but the technology it introduced shaped the next generation of high-horsepower trains. Some, a C6000CW, still run today. And when you see one painted in bold yellow or deep blue, you know you're staring at a machine built for one thing: domination. Now, if you thought the GEAC6000CW was intense, wait until you hear about a steam locomotive so powerful it almost didn't look real. Picture yourself standing in the Appalachian Mountains in the early 1940s. It's cold, fogged over, and the air smells like coal and pine trees. You hear a faint echo, a deep metallic heartbeat somewhere in the hills. And suddenly, bursting through the mist like a mechanical dragon, comes a machine longer than some city blocks. A locomotive built not just to move coal, but to tame mountains that even cars struggled to climb at the time. This is the Allegheny H8, one of the most powerful steam locomotives ever built. And believe me, you feel this thing before you even see it. It stretches to around 125 feet when fully assembled with its tender and the weight. Well over 1 million pounds. That's not a locomotive, that's a land-bound battleship, running on fire and water. The H8 was built for one reason: to drag insanely heavy coal trains over some of the steepest railway grades in the United States. The Appalachian terrain was unforgiving: sharp curves, slippery track, unpredictable weather. Most locomotives needed helper engines just to make it up the hill. But not the Allegheny. Its articulated 2666 wheel setup meant it could bend around curves, while putting maximum torque into the rails. The boiler inside this beast generated pressure 20 times higher than the air you're breathing right now. That steam powered a system delivering roughly 7,500 horsepower, an absolutely ridiculous number for a steam locomotive of the era. Imagine seeing it run. The ground shakes. Smoke pours upward like a volcanic eruption. The whistle slices through the mountain fog with this haunting, echoing scream. And the wheels, huge wheels, pound against the rails in a rhythm you feel in your chest. It didn't just pull freight. It dominated everything in its way. That's why people still talk about it with a kind of respect that borders on fear. But like every titan, the Allegheny faced its sunset. Diesel electrics arrived in the 1950s, cheaper to run and easier to maintain. So these giants were slowly retired, long before their time. Only two survive today, one of them sitting proudly at the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan. You can walk right up to it, stand under it, and feel just how small you really are. Trust me, you will never look at steam locomotives the same way. But let's travel across the world now, all the way to China, where engineers decided that if one locomotive wasn't powerful enough, maybe two permanently attached together would get the job done. Enter the China DF11G, a twin-unit diesel-electric locomotive built to carry people, not freight, across insane distances. Don't think about that. Most giant locomotives you've seen so far are all about hauling tons of cargo. The DF11G is built for speed, stability, and long-distance comfort. Each unit houses a massive V16 diesel engine, and the two together produce more than 6,400 horsepower. Combined length, around 144 feet. Weight, heavy enough to plant itself firmly on the rails even at high speed. You might imagine a big locomotive to be slow and lumbering, but this one regularly reaches over 100 miles per hour, making it one of the fastest diesel passenger units ever created. And its design looks like something straight out of a high-speed anime, a sharp wedge-shaped front, sleek lines running down its body, and dual headlights that cut through fog, dust, and snow like lasers. Picture standing on a quiet platform in rural China. You hear a low rumble in the distance. Then the air starts to vibrate. A deep rolling thunder approaches, not because of weight, but because of sheer engine force. And suddenly, the DF11G rushes past you with a roar that hits your chest like a wave. That's what riders described. Power you can feel, even while standing still. What makes it even more impressive is endurance. China's network is massive, with thousands of miles of non-electrified track. The DF11G was built to handle that reality. It could run huge distances with massive passenger consists, reaching cities where electric trains couldn't go. It was a bridge between old infrastructure and modern expectations. And it did that job beautifully. Even today, it still runs many major routes. And because of how dependable it became, its design influenced newer rail models across China. When a locomotive becomes the blueprint for the next generation, you know it left its mark, but the coldest test of all still lies ahead. And to reach it, we head north, far north, where winter is not a season but a permanent part of life. Imagine a place where temperatures drop so low that steel becomes brittle, where the wind rips across frozen oceans of white, where snowstorms can bury entire trains in minutes. Most locomotives would freeze, fail, or simply give up. But one locomotive family wasn't built to avoid the cold. It was built to conquer it. Meet the Bombardier IORE, one of the toughest and most powerful electric locomotives ever created. Designed to haul iron ore through the unforgiving lands between Sweden and Norway. The EORE isn't just strong, it's practically indestructible. Picture two giant units permanently locked together, stretching more than 150 feet and weighing nearly 800,000 pounds. And the horsepower, a mind-blowing 10,800 horsepower in total. That's enough to pull over 8,000 metric tons of iron, ore in one go, basically dragging an entire mountain behind it. Its 12 powered axles grip the icy rails like claws. The low temperatures that break other machines barely bother the EORE. Snowstorms? It plows through them with its bright red armor glowing against the white landscape. Engineers designed it for extreme durability, and it paid off. The average IORE travels over 2.5 million miles in its lifetime without major failure. That's like circling Earth 100 times. And the sound? Imagine an electric hum mixing with the crunch of metal cutting through frozen air. The sight of this red giant emerging from a blizzard is something you don't forget. For people in those regions, the EORE isn't just a locomotive. It's a lifeline, the machine that keeps the mining economy alive, no matter the weather. But don't get too warm and comfortable yet, because the next locomotive isn't new. It isn't clean, and it wasn't designed to be efficient. It was designed to be outrageous, the biggest steam locomotive the Soviet Union ever attempted to build. And trust me, it shows. Asterisk. Now imagine a train so big, so long, so extreme, that even the engineers building it weren't completely sure it would work in the real world. Not because they didn't know how to design locomotives, but because no one had ever attempted something this outrageous before. Travel with me to the Soviet Union in 1934, a time when the government wanted to show the world that its engineering power had no limits. And instead of building something practical, they decided to build something gigantic, something that would shock other nations, something that would scream, "Look what we can do!" This was the Soviet AA20, a locomotive so unusual that even today, it looks like a machine from another reality. The first thing you notice isn't the length, even though it's stretched around 135 feet. It's not even the weight, which was over 500,000 pounds. No, the first thing anyone notices is the wheels. There are 20 of them. 20 driving wheels. A wheel arrangement so absurd that no other steam locomotive in history used it. It was classified as a 4-1-4-4, 4 wheels in front, 14 massive driving wheels in the middle, 4 wheels in the back. It looked like a steel centipede crawling across the rails. The idea behind this madness was simple but extreme. The Soviet rail network needed to move heavier loads, much heavier. And to avoid destroying the tracks, engineers thought spreading the weight across 14 driving wheels would solve the problem. On paper, it was brilliant. On actual rails, well, that's where things got complicated. Imagine trying to turn a locomotive with 14 fixed driving wheels. It was like trying to steer a skyscraper. In fact, the AA20 had trouble doing basic things other locomotives did without thinking. Curves were nearly impossible. It required special track conditions. Maintenance was a nightmare. And the locomotive was so long and rigid that even experienced engineers struggled to keep it running smoothly. It didn't matter how strong it was on paper. If a locomotive can't turn, it's not going far. But you have to admit, the sheer ambition behind this steam monster commands respect. Soviet engineers built it not because they needed it that big, but because they wanted to prove they could build something bigger than anyone else. And even though it was never put into full service, the AA20 survives. Today in a museum in St. Petersburg, visitors stand in front of it and stare, like they're looking at a steel dinosaur from a forgotten era. And in a way they are. But if you think that's wild, let me show you a diesel locomotive so powerful, it actually held the world record. And unlike the Soviet giant, this one didn't just exist, it dominated. Imagine it's the late 1960s in America. The Union Pacific Railroad is celebrating its 100-year anniversary, and instead of cutting a cake or having a parade, they say, "You know what? Let's build the biggest, most powerful diesel locomotive the world has ever seen." A normal company would build a special edition. Union Pacific built the Myth. This was the EMD DA40X, better known as the Centennial. And the moment you see it, you understand why. Picture a locomotive almost 100 feet long, weighing around 600,000 pounds, and holding not one but 2 V16 diesel engines inside a single frame. 2 engines, not connected locomotives. 1 body, 2 odds. Both engines together produce 6,600 horsepower, making the Centennial the most powerful diesel-electric locomotive ever put into regular service. That record still stands today. Now imagine standing next to the tracks as a Centennial rolls past you. The sound is unreal, a deep, layered growl, like 2 diesel beasts roaring in unison. When these locomotives ran in pairs, it felt like the earth itself was vibrating. And they weren't built for speed alone. They were designed to replace 2 regular locomotives with 1 giant, improving efficiency and reducing operating costs. And they did exactly that. With 8 powered axles gripping the rails. The Centennial could haul over 150 loaded freight cars by itself, even over long, grueling mountain routes. It was a machine built for American landscapes, big, open, and endless. And for years, the Centennial was the flagship of the Union Pacific fleet. Drivers loved it. Fans adored it. Photographers chased it. But all legends fade. The Centennial was powerful, but also complex. Maintaining two engines inside one giant frame wasn't easy. By the early 1980s, most were retired. But the story doesn't end there. Several units were preserved, and one of the most famous examples lives at the Union Pacific Railroad Museum in Omaha, Nebraska. It still draws crowds, still inspires awe, and still holds that world record. But we're not done. Because there's a locomotive so iconic, so legendary, that even people who know nothing about trains recognize its name. A machine so large that the first time you see it, your brain almost refuses to believe it's real. A machine that didn't just push the limits of steam power, it shattered them. Before we get there, though, imagine this, you're in the mountains of Wyoming. The air is thin, the winds are strong, and trains moving through this region need more power than almost anywhere else in America. Railroads struggled with helper engines, delays, breakdowns, and massive operational costs. So Union Pacific gave engineers a simple order: build a locomotive that can conquer this terrain alone. No helpers, no compromises, no excuses, and the answer they came up with became one of the most famous locomotives in human history. But that's for the final chapter. Before the grand finale, I want you to picture something. A set of curved tracks high in the mountains, cliffs dropping off on one side, snow dusting the rails on the other. You hear a distant thunder. Not weather. A machine. A shadow larger than any locomotive you've seen before. And as it gets closer, the ground trembles, the rails hum, and you feel the power building. This is the kind of moment people still talk about decades later. A moment when engineering meets myth. A moment when a machine becomes a legend. In the next part, you'll meet the locomotive that people travel across the country just to witness. The one that made history. The one that refused to die. The biggest steam locomotive ever put into full service. Now close your eyes for a moment and picture this. You're standing along a quiet stretch of track in the middle of Wyoming. The sky is wide and open, the air crisp, and the land feels endless. You hear nothing but wind, until faintly, a deep rumble begins rolling across the plains. It's low at first, barely noticeable, but every second it grows. Louder, heavier, stronger, the rails start to quiver. The ground begins to tremble, and suddenly, bursting around the bend, a steel titan charges toward you like a living mountain of iron and fire. This is the Union Pacific Big Boy, the largest and most powerful steam locomotive ever built for real-world long-term service. There were bigger experimental engines. There were longer or heavier test models. But none matched the Big Boy in both size and actual performance. This was the king of steam, the king of the rails. A machine so massive it redefined what a locomotive could be. It measured about 132 feet in length. That's longer than 3 school buses parked end to end. Fully loaded with its tender, it weighed over 1.2 million pounds. Think about that for a second. Most locomotives today don't even get close to that weight. The Big Boy wasn't just heavy. It was a rolling mounting dot. When Union Pacific asked for a locomotive that could conquer the brutal grades of Sherman, Hill, and the Rocky Mountain passes without needing helper engines, most engineers probably thought, yeah, good luck with that. But ALCO, the American Locomotive Company, accepted the challenge. They didn't just design a locomotive. They engineered a legend. The Big Boy's massive boiler produced up to 6,300 horsepower. And if you're thinking, wait, some diesel locomotives today produce more than that. Remember this, steam horsepower is different. The torque from this machine was unreal. Its articulated 4884 wheel setup allowed it to twist around curves that no locomotive this big should have been able to handle. Each driving wheel was taller than the average adult's waist. The connecting rods alone were heavy enough to crush a car, and despite its massive size, this monster could move. At top speed, it reached over 80 miles per hour, which is insane for something weighing more than 1 million pounds. Imagine watching that rush past you. Imagine the wind blast. The sound like a thunderstorm colliding with a freight train. It's no wonder rail workers respected and sometimes feared the Big Boy. Only 25 of them were ever built, and each one carried a number between 4,000 and 4,024. And believe it or not, the name Big Boy wasn't chosen by the company. A factory worker simply chalked those words onto the boiler of the first completed unit, and the nickname stuck. Today, it's one of the most recognizable names in the entire world of locomotives. But here's where things get truly legendary. After steam locomotives were replaced by diesel in the late 1950s, all Big Boys were retired. For decades, they sat silent in museums or on display tracks, frozen in time. People believed none of them would ever run again. How do you even restart something that weighs over 1 million pounds and has been sleeping for half a century? In 2019, Union Pacific answered that question. They restored Big Boy No 4014 to full operating condition. Full operating condition. Think about the work required. Thousands of parts. Special tools no longer made. Engineering knowledge from a long-gone era. But they did it. And when Big Boy 4014 rolled out of the steam shop for the first time in 60 years, people from all over the country lined up along the tracks just to see it move. Some cried. Some stood speechless. Some simply recorded the moment, unable to believe the giant had awakened from its slumber. And when 4014 let out its first whistle blast, the sound carried for miles. Deep, piercing, ancient, alive. A sound from the golden age of steam, brought back to life. Today, Big Boy 4014 tours the United States, drawing massive crowds everywhere it goes. Kids climb onto their parents' shoulders. Real fans scream with excitement. People drive hundreds of miles just to stand near it for a few seconds. Because seeing a Big Boy isn't like watching a train. It's like watching history itself move. And that is the perfect way to end this journey. Because every locomotive you've met, from South Africa's Desert Warriors to China's high-speed twins,